Hi everyone, Eric aka Justice Blinded here to talk to you today about KeyForge Cube. Now, before everyone runs away, let me say right off the bat, this is not an approved format by FFG. This is kind of a definitely not kind of, is a fan-created format. It is not for everyone. I really do think that everyone can have fun playing this game, but some people just don't like the concept of building your own deck in KeyForge, even under a set of restrictions, and for those people, this may not be for them, and I totally get it. No big deal. But if you don't know what Cube is, you want to learn more about Cube, even if it's just to reinforce your hatred of Cube, totally cool. I'm all about educating people here at Knowledge is Power, so I'm going to talk more about Cube right now, and we can get into some of the details about what is Cube, how the process works, how you build a deck, and go on. A few other points of clarification off the top. I want to give a shout out to Colby, aka Kodamaran from Bouncing Death Quark, for being the first person, I think, to bring this onto the scene, if you will, at the Albany Vault Tour, and I just kind of took the ball and ran from there. And so, shout out to him as being kind of the originator of this idea. Also, I will say that I'm going to explain to you the process of how I do Cube here. You can do, if you will, you can run a Cube in many different ways. I don't think there's any objectively wrong ways other than some ridiculous theoretical examples you can come up with. The important part is that you're having fun and you're enjoying what you're doing. So I'm going to explain how I run Cube, and of course, included in that are a lot of basic fundamentals about Cube, and about, how the drafting process works, and so on and so forth. So, what is a Cube? If you've played a Cube draft in Magic the Gathering, or other card games, or even a booster draft, the principles are very similar in KeyForge. Deck construction is a little bit different, obviously, because it's KeyForge, and there are unique rules to deck construction in KeyForge. And we'll talk about those when we get there, but it's very similar to if you've played a Cube in any other type of card game. So, but if you haven't, don't worry. We're going to explain it right now. But that's just kind of a starting point if you're familiar with that. All right, so let's talk about the Cube. So, this is my Cube. Shout out to my team, Knowledge is Power. Also, just to give a shout out to Balance Sheet, who made this beautiful artwork for us when we hosted Shadow Worlds it feels like so long ago, but I guess it was technically still this year. I'm recording this in December of 2020, so it was technically still this year. These were our prize playmats for Shadow Worlds. I got a copy, but you generally cannot acquire. This is uniquely created art by him, and you can't really get these anywhere. So we're very proud of this, and Balance Sheet is an amazing artist. So shout out to him for this beautiful playmat design. But let's talk about Cube. So, this is my Cube, as I said. In the Cube, you will see it's just a bunch of cards, right? There are, you can have them sleeved, unsleeved, minor sleeved, but there are a bunch of different cards from each house. Each of 9 houses, because there are 9 houses across the 4 sets we have in KeyForge, each house has 50 cards in my Cube. It's important to keep the number of cards in each house consistent in the Cube, identical, not consistent, identical, because that will provide you with an equal chance of drafting cards from all of those houses, right? You don't want to have like 80 Brobnar cards and 50 of every other house. You could do that if you want, on the theory that like you really want people to play Brobnar. Again, no wrong way to do Cube, but I would recommend that you don't do that if you want it to be a fairly balanced format. If you don't care about that, have at it by all means. So, like I said, these are all KeyForge cards, right? There's nothing special about these cards themselves. You can see there are cards from every house, every set. There are all sorts of different things. And I actually just passed a horseman there. That's a good time to talk about what you can also do with the Cube. Like, my Cube has paired cards, right? So if you draft this horseman in the draft, you want to play that, the other 3 horsemen will be in a different pool that is separate from the cards, right? So I have this separate box of cards here that has things like routine jobs, other horsemen. So if you draft 1 routine job, you get access to more routine jobs out of this. You're not required to play the cards you draft, and you're not required to play these cards even if you're playing the main card from the deck, right? So if for some reason you only wanted to play 1 horseman, you could. I wouldn't recommend that, but you could, right? You could cut out 1 of the horsemen. You could cut out 2 of the horsemen if you want. But that's what these paired cards are. You can do that with a Cube, or you can just put all of the cards in the actual Cube themselves. I will say, if you construct your own Cube, and you have a hard time cutting down to like 50 in each house, the number of cards you want to have in this cube. You can it's kind of a workaround, right? You have some paired cards, like you can have one of the Panapakas in the sideboard. You can have all sorts of other stuff in the sideboard. I call it sideboard, but you call it whatever you want. These cards that are not part of the cube. Anyway, so that's what this is. That's an explanation of that. Not required by any means. You could just have all the cards in here. So the cards from every set, every house, and what happens when you're playing cube is that you would shuffle up all these cards, right? And then you would deal them out in packs, right? Air quote there. So you deal them out in packs of a specific number. I'll show you a chart in a minute. That's my best advice as to how to deal out in pack, how many cards should be in each pack, how many packs you should play. But, I'm just picking an arbitrary number of cards. Let's say, like, you dealt out, this was a pack, right? And as a player, you go through and you pick one of these cards to draft out of this pack. Then you would take the rest of the cards. So you pick, whatever, red penny, set that aside, that's your card. Then you would take this pack and hand it to the person to your left or to your right. And then they would hand you a pack, right? Different pack, obviously. And you would then pick one card of that and pass it along. You complete that process until there are no more cards remaining in any packs that round. Then you would have a new pack of cards, right? Pull a new pack of cards out. You would then open that. You would look at that pack privately. You're not like doing this face up. It's all private information. And when you draft cards, you don't draft them face up like this, or at least that's not how cube is generally done. You can do it that way if you want to, but generally you would keep this card secret, so you would just have a card here, and no one would know what you'd be drafting. And then you would pass the pack on, and you would pass in the opposite direction every other round, right? So if you had 4 pack rounds, you would pass like left first round, second round you would pass right, and then you would pass left the third round, and so on. The idea is that so you're diversifying the way in which the cards are traveling around the cube. One other point just generally is that you will never use, generally speaking, you will never use all of the cards in the cube in one draft. And that's an interesting thing for a couple different reasons, right? First of all, even if you know every single card in the cube, you might not see every single card in the draft. Not just because other people are taking cards, but you might not see every card in the draft because it might not get chosen out of this cube to be in individual packs, right? So when you do all of your drafting, you may have, I don't know, some number of cards left over. I'll show you a chart in a second, but like these cards never get drafted, let's say, in this particular iteration of the cube or this run through of the cube. And you won't know what these are because you'll shuffle up the whole cube. You can put them on a table, like mix them all up and then form packs, or you can just pass them around, like take out different things, pass them around to people, shuffle them up, and then make packs, however you want to randomize the cards. But there will be some number of cards in your cube that are random, that are not drafted. And the other thing that does is it creates a unique drafting experience for each draft, right? Because you don't know when you take that, when you take that battle fleet the first round, you don't know if key abduction is going to be included in the draft. Odds are it will, because you're going to draft an overwhelming majority of the cards. Someone else may take the card, you may never see it, but you don't know for sure that's going to be included, so it adds an additional strategic element to the actual draft process. So, let's talk about numbers, right? So let's talk about how many cards are in each pack. So here's a diagram that I made. This is my recommendation for the number of, this is all based off of a 450 card cube, like mine and the one I showed you before, 50 cards at each of 9 houses. These are my recommendations for how many draft rounds you should have, how big the pack should be, and how many cards are used and not used in the cube. So I wouldn't generally, you can try, but I wouldn't generally recommend playing a cube with fewer than 4 participants. Because, first of all, you're not, there's going to be a bye every round, and secondly, you're going to, it's just going to be kind of weird if you only have, 2 people drafting. You can do that, absolutely, but I wouldn't recommend that. And you cannot, so long as you want to be reasonably fair, like, you can't really draft with more than 8 participants. So it's like a pod. If you ever gone to a Vault Tour, or even, I think they did this at GCs as well, Grand Championships, the side events, right? They have 8-person pods all the time of doing this random stuff. So this would be an example of a perfect game that would fit into a side event at a Vault or something like that. Nothing main event. I can dream, but I know that's probably never going to happen. So, let me explain this chart. The rows highlighted in yellow are my specific recommendations as to what you would do if you had a certain number of participants. And the other rows just show other options, right? So this is just basic math. If you have 4 participants and you have 3 draft rounds, you could have a pack size, meaning you could have 18 cards in a pack, and you would have you would use only 216 out of the cube of 450, so you'd have only half of the cards used. Less than half, actually, of the cards used in the cube. That's why I don't recommend that, but it adds a different level of dynamic. Like, there's a lot more uncertainty in that because you can't consistently rely on, even if you're the only one at a table drafting a house, you can't consistently rely on all the great cards in that house showing up in the draft because you're only going to see half the cards in the cube. And that's why I recommend you could see under 4 participants, I recommend 5 draft rounds. It's the only number of participant groupings that I recommend 5 rounds, but you have so many extra cards when you only have 4 people playing. So 5 rounds, pack size of 16, and then these are just the math. Like, you're going to use not quite twice as many cards as you won't, but close to it. 5 people, I recommend 4. I recommend 4 draft rounds for every group above 4. So 5, 6, 7, 8 people, I recommend 4 draft rounds. So 4 draft rounds with 5 people, 17 cards a pack. You're using 340 out of 450. 6 people, 4 rounds, 16 cards a pack. You're using 384. 7 people, 4 rounds, 15 cards a pack, using 420 cards. And 8 people, 4 rounds, 13 cards a pack. You're using almost the entire cube. You don't need to memorize this. You can pause this. If people want, I'll put this chart up somewhere. It's not like proprietary information or anything. So, but this is just the basic math on what I would recommend in terms of pack size. The dynamics change a lot when the pack size goes up and when the players go down, right? So in a 4-person in a 4-person draft pod, if you have a pack of 16 cards, each of you is getting 4 cards out of each pack, right? Whereas if that's the extreme low end. If you look at the extreme upper end, if you have 8 people and there are 4 draft rounds and their pack size is 13, you are only getting you're getting 1 card out of most packs, and you're getting you're getting 1 card of about half the packs. So you're getting 2 cards of about half the packs, right? So the first 5 packs that you see in a draft round, if you're playing with 8 people, under this yellow bar at the bottom, the first 5 packs, you would get 1 additional card out of the pack. But after pack 5, within a round that it was passed to you, you wouldn't get more than 1 card. And that changes your strategy. I have a completely separate video where I'm going to talk about strategy later, but that changes the strategy entirely. So without delving too much into that strategy, I will just say here's kind of generally how you would answer the question, how big should the packs be when I'm making the draft? And this table will give you some illustration, right? So let's go back to the cube, and I've created some packs here, if you will, to talk about the process, to explain the process in greater detail. Now, I said before that you open a pack. Let's say you opened this pack of cards. I'm going to spread them out like this. Obviously, these would not be public information. You would just look at them in your hand and pick one of the cards. But I'm going to spread them out like this, and actually sorry, I thought I did this before, but apparently not. Let me put the houses together so you can kind of get an illustration of what this would look like. Let's see, we got that over there. You can see there are cards from all these different houses. And I got a regrowth. I don't think there's anything in the regrowth. Right, okay. So these are all the cards of different houses. Oh, sorry, camera. Okay, so you can see all the cards. This would be an example of a pack. You would look over this pack, you would pick a card out of this pack, and then you would you would pass it onward, right? So you would pick a card. So you're a huge Collector Worm fan, or you take Collector Worm, and then you put all these together. You'd pass them on to your opponent on your left in the cube. You would sit generally in a circle, so that you can pass the cards around simply. But you would all sit together at the beginning of the pod. You take one from the pack, you turn the pack over, pass the pack on, and this card would be face down. We're going to have it face up just so you could see it, but it would be face down. And then you would get another pack, right? Let's say this was your second pack. This is a particularly spicy pack, as you will see. Right, so this is already your card. This is a super spicy pack. There's all sorts of crazy logo stuff in here. You have Hawk, which is good. You have the Library, which is one of my favorite cards in the game, although it's not the card I would take out of this pack. You have EE on the fringes, so maybe you just decided early on in a draft, we'll talk about strategy in a separate video, but early on in the draft, you don't want to like lock yourself into a house, so you probably want to take the best value out of this pack. And it's debatable what the best value is. It might be Eddie, it might be Library Access, especially since you're making a constructed deck. You could do silly things with that. It might be Auto-Encoder. You could maybe make a case for E, but I doubt it. But you see, these are your options. So you would pick a card, I don't know, say you want to hard commit to Mars. Not a great strategy, but let's say right now you're going to hard commit to Mars. You take Incubation Chamber, and then you pass the pack on to the left, and you get a third pack, right? So that's how the process works. And at the end of the draft, you will have, this is a pack, but you'll have a bunch of cards, right? You will have a whole ton of cards. And the way that I handle deck construction in my cube is that you have to form a regulation, quote-unquote, deck of KeyForge. So you have to have 3 different houses, and only 3 houses, and you have to have 12 cards in each house. And if you have enough cards in the houses you're playing, you have to play all 12 cards. Say you drafted, 12 cards in a house, but you really don't like the 12th card. You have to play all 12 cards that you drafted. That's the rule that I play with, although you can modify different things. And you may say, Eric, what happens, especially if I'm in a bigger pod, I don't see as many cards, what happens if I get through the draft and I have 12 disc cards that I want to play, I have 12 Logos cards that I want to play, but I only have 11 Sanctum cards I want to play. How do I make a deck? Well, that does happen sometimes. Or only have 11 Sanctum cards, period, right? How do you do that? So what I do is I say, when you're building your deck, you take one of the cards you're not playing, you flip it upside down, and so that's a card in your deck, right? So, and the way this works is, this would be, you could play this a couple different ways. Like, it's a penalty card, so when you draw this card, you could treat it like a card that says, basically like Omni, discard this card. It's not really an Omni because you have to have an Omni effect on the card in play, but basically, you can just discard this card at any time, but it's a card that clogs up your hand that you draw and that you don't, that you can't get any use out of. Like, it's basically like a chain, kind of. You understand what I mean. You could play it that you could discard this card on any turn, or you could play it that you can only discard this card on a turn where you call that house, right? So if this is a Sanctum, an extra Sanctum card that you have, you can only discard that on a Sanctum turn. That's one variation you can play. In order to enforce that, you would probably have to tell your opponent before the round, you always have to tell your opponent before the round what 3 houses you're playing, because there are a lot of different cards like Control the Weak and other things that care about what houses are on your opponent's Archon card, right? So you would have to tell your opponent what houses you're playing. However, you wouldn't normally need to tell them more than that, but if you did the variation of the penalty cards where you can only discard the penalty cards in the house, like when you've called that house, then you would have to tell your opponent, okay, I'm playing Mars, Sanctum, Brobnar, but I only have 11 Sanctum cards, I have 1 Sanctum penalty card, so that your opponent would be able to then verify when you're discarding this card that you're not just like, oh, hey, this is really a Brobnar card. Obviously, this is a for fun format, but, if you wanted to enforce it that way, that's a thing that you could do. And then at the end of the draft, what you would do is you'd simply take the card. Before you put everything back into the box, into the cube, you would obviously take the card, flip it over, and then you're good to go. One other explanation of things that I do, this is not required, but this is an example of different ways that you can handle and fun things that you can do with a cube. So you can have a pack of, these are packs of stickers I've made. You can have a pack of house stickers. The number of each house on this doesn't really matter. But this is just an example of house stickers, right? You can have a pack of house stickers. And you can have a rule that after each draft, before you build your decks, you can Maverick 2 and exactly 2 cards. And when I say Maverick, what that means is you can turn... actually, that's a terrible example of a Maverick. You don't want to Maverick Rock Hurling Giant. That's kind of a jerk move. We'll talk about that in the strategy video. But say you wanted to Maverick these 2 cards, right? What that means is you have to invert the houses, right? You always have to, when you do Mavericks, at least this is how I play it, you always have to change the houses of 2 cards into the respective house. So if these were your Mavericks, you would have to Maverick Lollop into Dis, and you would have to Maverick Library of the Damned into Brobnar. You would do that by taking off one of the stickers. You know, you could put it on, I recommend putting it on the card itself and not the sleeve, because if you put it on the sleeve, shuffling could tear off the thing and it gets complicated. So you put it on the card itself, like where the house icon is, you put it back into the sleeve, and then you put it in your deck or don't put it in your deck. There are a couple different things with this. Again, this is just the way I play it. You are not required to use either card, right? You could Maverick 2 cards, not use either of them. You could Maverick 2 cards and use both of them. You could Maverick 2 cards and use only 1 card. But if you choose to Maverick, you have to Maverick exactly 2 cards, because remember back what I said earlier, you want to keep the number of cards in each house the same in the cube. And that's why there's this rule, you have to switch houses rather than saying like, oh, I want to Maverick this into Mars and I want to Maverick this into Sanctum, and now we have 1 extra card in each of 2 houses, and that's a problem for the long-term health of your cube. When I say long-term health of the cube, I've alluded to the other factor about this, and that is something you could do is you can leave the Mavericks intact in the cube, right? So if you Maverick this into Brobnar, you Maverick this into Dis, after you're done with the draft, you throw it all into the box and you draft again, these will be they'll still have the stickers on them. You can clear the stickers if you want after every draft, but I recommend you don't, at least for a while. You can reset after a point in time if it gets ridiculous, but I recommend that you keep the stickers on, meaning that when you drafted the next time, this would be treated like a Brobnar card, right? It would have a Brobnar sticker on the card, and it would be treated like a Brobnar card in the draft. So if you drafted Library, you could only play that in Brobnar, unless, of course, you chose to Maverick it into something else, right? You put another sticker on top of the sticker, and you'd have to have a paired card to Maverick into. A paired card of another house to swap the houses, if that makes sense. So that is what I meant earlier when I said that this is kind of like a legacy board game if you play it with Mavericks, right? Because it's kind of this cool changing environment where if you played a cube with one group of friends at like at a local game store, and then you went to a vault tour or a championship of some kind, you brought your cube. I like to play cube a lot on downtime after the end of the day. So you brought your cube and you drafted with people, some of whom have never seen your cube before, and all of a sudden they open your cube and they say, oh, wow, they got a library in Brobnar or whatever, right? So it's a living, breathing thing that modifies over time, and it's really cool for that reason, not just because it's different and unexpected, but also because they're unique stories, right? Remember that time when Dave Mavericked... Oh, sorry. Remember that time when Dave Mavericked that library into Mars and did something stupid or whatever, right? Just as an example. So that's an example of the things that you could do with the cube draft. Those are the basic functions of cube. Like, that's how I run the cube. That's how I run the cube draft. That's how the Maverick system works. You can also do a thing where you restrict people. Like, you could cut these sheets into... You could start out with each tiny little... You could start with a strip of cards where there's one Maverick icon for each house, and pass those out to everyone in the cube draft, and then they have to, obviously for that round it's not a problem to Maverick, but then you could save those strips and say you only had at some point in time, you could say there was only these 4 options for the cube, right? Someone got past a strip that only had 4 options for Mavericks. So when you started the round, before you drafted, you knew that these were the only houses you can Maverick into and out of, let's just say, if the strip had been used a couple different times. And that further restricts your options for how you would Maverick as another element of strategy. There are all sorts of fun things you can do like that. You can restrict Maverick choices randomly before the round. Yeah, just a really fun format. I enjoy it a lot. It's for sure my favorite way to currently play KeyForge. And yeah, that's pretty much what the cube is. I'll have another video about strategy that I will post as well. But basically, that is how I run Cube. It's just, it's a really fun alternative format. I have my Discord on here. I'll just throw a basic plug out there. I build and sell these cubes to people. So if you are interested in purchasing a cube, feel free to message me on Discord. It's usually the best way to do it. And I'll explain the whole process to you if that's something you're interested in. But even if you're not, honestly, I am more than happy to spread the gospel, if you will, of Cube to anyone who will listen and to try, and anyone who's interested in trying out new and fun things. Whether you make your own cube, whether you buy a cube for me, whether you buy it for someone else, I'm happy any way it goes. I just want to show people a fun and interesting format that I enjoy, and that's definitely my most favorite way to play KeyForge, at least currently. Who knows? But, so that is pretty much it for Cube Basics. What is a cube? And we'll talk about strategy in the next video.